we have so many people that just help so much. And it really mirrored Mike's spirit in your generosity. So thanks to all of you. And today is a walk to the well. And if you are one of the people who are going to donate and sponsor, you could just take one of the offering envelopes and put it in and write walk to the well and just put it in the offering plate. Next week is the Long John Oktoberfest. And we're still in need of people to make food and purchase the beer for the beer tasting. And anyone willing to help next week set up, we're meeting here at 1 o'clock on Saturday. And if you're watching today, we're meeting at 12:30. So, I think that's it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I had something I was going to say, and I can't remember. Maybe I'll read over in the middle of church and I'll just say it.
Thank from Genesis, chapter 7 and chapter 9. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Go to the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, and the male and its mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and its mate, and 7 pairs of birds of the air also, male and female, to keep their kind alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. "And you, be fruitful and multiply, abound on the earth and multiply in it." Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." The word of the Lord. A reading from Psalm 51. "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you, you alone I have sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified in your sentence and blameless when you pass judgment. Indeed, I was born guilty, a sinner, when my mother conceived me. You desire truth in the inward being, therefore teach me wisdom in my secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and sustain me in a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will return to you. Deliver me from bloodshed, O God of my salvation, and my tongue will sing aloud of your deliverance. O God, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. For you have no delight in sacrifice. If I were to give a burnt offering, you would not be pleased. The sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. Do good to Zion in your good pleasure. Rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Then you will delight in right sacrifices, in burnt offerings, and whole burnt offerings. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. Here in second.
Jesus says, you do not understand. I I desire mercy. God desires mercy, not sacrifice. That is over here this morning. Okay, we're going to get there. We're going to start over here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Back in Genesis 1. And how does God do it? He speaks and things happen. It's like all awesome, powerful God who is way out there somewhere, and all he has to do is speak and it happens. And the cosmos comes into being, and the stars in their courses, and the land is separated from the water. And what God says about it all is, it is good. It is very good after he created human beings. Then, next chapter. We have God creating Adam and Eve. And God comes down and he's in the dirt and he's playing like a little child and he's fashioning animals and different things. And he brings them to Adam and says, "What are you going to name this one?" And then he breathes life into Adam and Eve. He takes the rib out of Adam's side and creates Eve, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. The kind of God portrayed in Genesis 2 is intimate. A God who is there, like us, with us. Chapter 3, we learn about the two trees. The tree of the knowledge, or the tree of life that we eat, all good things come from, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Adam and Eve eat with a little bit of prodding from a snake called Satan. They decide they would like to be like God. And so they take from the fruit of the tree and they eat of it, and their eyes are open. And all of a sudden, they have the ability to see right from wrong, good from evil. And all of a sudden, this power causes them to realize we're different, you and I. We have different parts. I think we should cover those parts because I think you're going to judge me because I'm already judging you. The ability to know good from evil is also the ability to judge. So now they're confronted with a problem. Are you going to reflect God's goodness? As in the tree of life. Are you going to be good, very good? Or are you going to look out and want to judge and be judged and reflect the judgment of God? Next chapter. Cain and Abel. Adam and Eve have two sons, Cain and Abel, and somewhere they get wives. We don't know. We don't ask. Cain is a farmer, and Abel is a herdsman, a cowboy. What we know is that when people first came on the earth, they were hunter-gatherers. You know what hunter-gatherers do? I'm hungry, let's go find some food, and we'll bring it back. We'll gather it and bring it back, and then we'll eat it. That's pretty much what they did. But then, over time, some people went, hey, why do we have to go all over the earth looking for this food? Why don't we dig it up and bring it to us, and we'll make a little garden. We'll make a bunch of different kinds of food that will sustain us and give us a great living and a diet. And then, for the first time, they had to decide, well, this is my garden, and that's your garden. And so land was something that could be bought and sold. It could be owned by people. Hunter-gatherers didn't own land. And then we have Abel. Abel was a herdsman. He was a cowboy. His flocks and herds would travel wherever they wanted to go. And what happens when Abel's flocks go on to Cain's farm? The flocks eat all of the plants. And we have conflict. It's like your peanut butter is in my chocolate. If anyone knows that. not taste good. It tasted like murder. And so Cain, they both bring a sacrifice to God. The kind of sacrifice Jesus is talking about down there. But we'll get to that in a minute. Cain is a farmer. He brings a sacrifice, probably some choice grain. Maybe some roasted barley, maybe some fragrant plants or flowers. That's his sacrifice. Abel brings the fat of some of his animals, and then he lights a fire under it, and boy, does that smell good. Now, we don't know what happened because the story is told by Cain, the survivor. And in Cain's version of this story, Cain says, the reason that I killed my brother is because God liked his sacrifice better than my sacrifice. I wonder if that was true. If God really liked one sacrifice more than... Any parents out there? You might like one picture that one of your kids draws a little better than the other picture, but do you tell them that? Absolutely not. That would not be loving. Is God loving? Yes, God is loving. But do our children sometimes perceive that they like the other sibling better than me? Oh, all the time. I used to just cut to the chase. When my kids are there, they'd say, Dad, do you like my sister better than me? I say, absolutely. She knocks it out of the park compared to you. Teach you for asking. I think my kids do that. I love it. But in the story of Cain and Abel, Cain says, Abel, come on out into the field. I got to show you something. And Abel comes out into the field, and then Cain kills him. And something unique happens here. God comes and says to Cain, where is your brother? Just for the record, which God is coming? Is it the God who speaks and everything happens, or the God who is playing in the dirt? It's the God who's playing in the dirt. Because he doesn't know where Cain's brother is. He can't find him. Where is your brother? Or maybe he just asks because he wants his brother to tell him what it is. And so Cain says, what? Am I my brother's keeper? The answer, by the way, is yes, we are all each other's keeper. And God says, because you have murdered your brother, I know this because I hear his blood speaking to me from the ground. Now this is groundbreaking. Not no pun intended. This is amazing because for the first time in human history, the shed blood of a victim is heard by God. And it matters to God. And so, God punishes Cain, not with death. He punishes him by banishing him. And he has to walk the earth. He's exiled. And Cain comes to God and says, but wait a minute. If I'm exiled and I'm out there, I'm going to be vulnerable. Anybody can attack me. And God says, all right, I'll fix it. This is what I'm going to do. If somebody attacks you and kills you, I will kill 7 of their relatives. Not very comforting, is it? Because that won't happen until this has happened. Vengeance went from an eye for an eye, or 1 for 1, to 7 for 1. And as we turn the chapter to the next chapter, we have the story of Noah. In the beginning of the 6th chapter says that God regretted ever making humankind. Because all of the thoughts and inclinations of human hearts were only violent all the time. That's what happens when you trade 1 dead person for 7 dead persons. And then those 7 persons are avenged by 49 persons. And at the time of Noah, the world was so corrupt and so violent that God even regretted creating people. We know the story of Noah. and the flood and the ark. Right? You see it in little children's books all the time. We have two little antelope walking up a plank into a boat, and two giraffe, and they got their heads stuck out, and two elephants, and two, although that's not really what it says, is it? We just heard it read that God told Noah to bring 7 pairs of clean animals and 1 pair of unclean animals. Now you're scratching your head going, wait a minute. I thought we didn't even know what clean and unclean animals were until monarchy much later when the 10 Commandments were expanded into 600. And you would be right. So how do you reconcile this? There was no such thing. Noah didn't know what clean animals were. How would he know how many to bring? What happened is, all of these stories from Genesis were told. They were stories that were handed down orally. In other words, you tell your children tell their children. You would have heard these stories thousands of times. You would know them inside and out, backwards and forwards. You could repeat them to your children. And what makes it interesting is these stories then are somewhat malleable or flexible. If something happens that this story tends to address, this story becomes prominent. But if something happens that this story tends to address, this story becomes more prominent. And just like the game of telephone, sometimes things get a little bit skewed or turned. And so we have the story, when it was finally written down, was at the very critical point in Jewish history, where the last 2 tribes of the 12 tribes were being carried off into slavery into Babylon, around 700 BC, before Christ. And they realized that if we do not write down these stories, our children will never learn them. They had the technology to write stories down and pass them around. And so they did. And in some ways, at that moment, when you write the story down, it stops being the living story and it becomes the written word. For better or for worse. So God's idea was to punish all of the people for the violence that was on the earth. Now, if you lived at the time of this story being written down or before, you would have known of another popular story that was a secular story. It came from the Babylonians. It was officially called the Babylonian combat myth, and it contains stories about the creation of the world. It contains stories about other things, but one story in particular is the story of the Great Flood. And the Hebrew Bible contains, word for word, some of the same sentences from a 1,000-year-older story from the Babylonians. Is that a coincidence? If I was in college, they would call that plagiarism. I think they did it on purpose because they wanted to tell you something about how these 2 stories are different. So the one story in the Nag Hammadi, which is what this is called, the cache that they found of these ancient writings, the story goes like this. The gods, and there were always gods plural. It wasn't until the Hebrew people came and said that there is one God. So 1,000 years before, when this story was told, there were all of these gods. And where did the gods live? They lived up in the heavens. And what happens in the first story in the Nag Hammadi, the Babylonian story, is that the gods can't sleep because the humans are making too much noise. They're having too much fun. Sounds like parents and their kids aren't going to bed on time, doesn't it? Only in this story, the gods come down or the gods decide we are going to flood the world and rid ourselves of these pesky human beings. No ark, no righteous family, only the door, the trap door that opens up the heavens to the earth and floods the whole thing. And that's the end of humankind until the gods decide to create more. The Hebrew story, the one we have, the sacred story in our scripture, tells of a story where God is really upset, not because of the noise level, but because of the violence. Something a little bit more worthy of our attention. And he doesn't just flood the world, he saves one family. This is actually the story of the Jewish nation. So we turn the page on this story and we eventually come to the story of Abraham. And Abraham leaves his parents and he goes out into the unknown, and 3 visitors are coming. And how he reacts to these 3 visitors changes the course of the entire world. Instead of treating them with violence, he treats them with kindness. He goes and he prepares cakes of flour for them and brings water for them. And because of his kindness and his hospitality, God sees in Abraham the right kind of person. And so he says, I will bless you. I will make your name great so that you will be a blessing. The whole reason of choosing Abraham was because God wanted a representative who would reflect, much like Adam and Eve were given the ability to reflect God's goodness in the world. And so Abraham and his wife said, well, that's great, but how much reflecting can we really do? We're really old. And God says, well, I'm going to give you children. And they, of course, laugh. And then God gives them children. And who's laughing now? Oh, they probably are. Children are funny, let's face it. So the reason that God chose Abraham was because God wanted someone to carry this reflection of God's goodness and love into the world. And so the story slightly changes. We go ahead and we have this guy named Joseph. And he is born late in this family. And he's the favored son. And the favored son, the brothers all gang up on him. And they sell him into slavery. What a terrible, treacherous thing. And they lie to their father and say he was killed by an animal. Again, we can reflect the goodness of God, or we can reflect the anger and hostility of the world. And what happens? Because he too is a good and loving person and kind, he gets raised up to be Potiphar's second in command. A Jew, a slave, is now running the Egyptian nation in all practical purposes. And then he has another setback. Potiphar's wife takes a liking to him and accuses him of terrible things that he did not do. And he gets put back in jail. Did that setback change his life forever? No, it was a setback. Because he continued to reflect God's love and kindness and goodness to the world. And eventually he got brought back and put into a high place. And then his brothers come a-calling because they ran out of food. And he had saved the empire in Egypt. And his brothers come, and his brothers don't realize who he is. Does he now get revenge on them? No, he does not. He reflects and he continues to reflect God's goodness. And these 12 brothers become the 12 tribes of Israel, God's holy nation. We can keep turning the page until we get finally to this story today where Jesus is confronted by the Pharisees. And they're saying, you're your disciples are breaking the rules. And Jesus says, go and learn what it means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. What happened is the Israelites became a nation of sacrifice. At first, Abraham went out and he was going to sacrifice his own son. And a step forward was to find a ram in the bushes. And then they became a nation who sacrificed rams and goats and bulls and pigeons and grain. And they had more and more rules for all the different kinds of sacrifices. And what they believed about these sacrifices is that is what God wants. And Jesus comes and he says, actually, God is not interested in your sacrifices. God is not interested in your burnt offerings. If you really knew God, you would know that God desires mercy or kindness or goodness. And we turn the chapter. What happens to Jesus? Ultimately, he speaks truth to power. The message of truth he is speaking is God doesn't want your violent atonement. And so they decide, we'll show you violent atonement. And they make Jesus the sacrifice. And what does Jesus do? Does he strike heaven and earth, fire and lightning bolts at his aggressors? Does he pay them back sevenfold? He surrenders. This is the only way to stop the chain of increasing violence is through vulnerability. And he gives himself up to be crucified. And as he lays on the cross, dying, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. We all have a choice of what are we going to reflect? Are we going to reflect the judgment and the sacrifice, the always trying to make up for bad behavior and ask? Or are we just going to keep trying to reflect God's goodness in the world? Even when it's not shown to us. Even when things go bad. We have setbacks. We continue to see God's goodness in others and reflect that in the world. Jesus came to show us the heart and character of God. The God who does not want sacrificial atonement. The God who wants kindness.